What's up, CODEX? This is Dan here, joined by Tim the Terrible, and we tonight, whatever point you're watching this, are interviewing comic great Bob Hall. So thank you for taking time out of your day to sit and talk with us.
Thanks for calling me a comic book great. So
the title is well earned.
Yes, sir. So I guess we'll just go ahead and jump into it. One thing always interests me with comic creators is, what was it that first got you interested in comics? Like, what books were you reading as a fan before you became a comic professional?
Well, I will tell you my life story. When I was, I think about 4, it might have been 3, but I think 4, I had a sick spell, and apparently my folks told me this. I was vomiting blood, which panicked them terribly. I got rushed to the hospital. After some initial throwing up, I felt just fine, but they, did all the tests and said, "No, you're not fine. You have to stay here. We don't know what's wrong with him." Of course, they weren't talking to me, but I could. They assumed that I couldn't hear what they were saying to my parents. I don't know why. And so I was relatively unconcerned because I felt just great, but they kept saying, no, you can't go home yet. And they kept bringing me things to pacify me, like comic books. And I ended up with a giant stack of comic books because I was there about 3 days. And then a nurse, they were going to take me down for more tests. And they were starting to wheel me out, and the nurse noticed me scratching behind my ear and said, "Oh, I think I better go get the doctor." And he came in and looked behind my ear and said, "Oh my God, you have measles."
Oh.
And it turned out I had intestinal measles.
Oh,
very unusual. Then they just were inside. They didn't come out until that point. And he said, "Oh, well, you're going to be fine. We have to send you home immediately because that's the most contagious disease we know." And
wow.
and and those comic books that you have to take all of those home with you.
You're like, oh darn.
So I ended up with a shopping bag of unedited comic books, which I wasn't quite able to read some of them yet at 4. There were some Karl Barks in there, though that was just fine. And then other stuff that, including EC comics that I was much too, shouldn't be reading at all. But or the equivalent thereof. I don't know what that was.
All the crime and horror and mystery comic books, yeah.
This was the very, very late 1940s when the superhero stuff had faded, except for the major DC characters, and all that other stuff was happening. So I got this wide panoply of comic books thrown into my lap at that point, and that was it. I think after that I became a comic book fan. Slowly, Karl Barks became my hero. I didn't know there was a Karl Barks then, but like a lot of people, he was the good duck man, and you recognized his work. And I think that was a major influence on me because he told these great stories, these great adventures for kids. And so that went on until I was maybe 14. And at age 14, a magical thing happened. This was like 1958, and Universal released all of its Universal horror movies to TV at that point. And that was when they had all of these goofy hosts became a fad of that would introduce these things. And at the same time, Hammer Films began its heyday with The Horror of Dracula came out that year. And Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, with covers by Basil Gagos, came out. All of this in the same year. And that was, I think, the next thing that really kind of went, ooh, I have to do something in this field. Um, I did a lot of portraits at that point. I loved Gagos's work. I'm not sure you pronounce it Gagos. I don't know. I've never heard it pronounced out loud. So if you know, correct me. And then there were other things along the way. I'm old enough that there was not a full day of network television available. And so local stations started showing old Universal International and Republic serials. And I got exposed to the Buster Crabbe Flash Gordons,
Nice.
which to me, still in my head, they're better than Star Wars. Now, I know they're not, but something you've seen at the age of 5, 6, 7, there's nothing ever better than those things that you were exposed to at that point.
That's right.
Yeah,
And
that's the stuff that that you carry with you forever.
Besides which, Jules Pfeiffer wrote in his book on comics that this was pre Christopher Reeves, who I think was the next person that this applied to. But he said that Buster Crabbe was the only actor he had ever seen who seemed to have a black line drawn around his body, which was true. He was perfection. And the last thing that really influenced me was my dad loved auctions, and he would go down and we lived above an auction house for a while, and he would go down, much to my mother's chagrin, late at night and come home with the last thing they would do was grab bag boxes. You didn't know what was in them, and he came back with one that had all of these big little books. And for those who don't out there that don't know what those were reprints of daily strips in a format that was probably 6 by 6 inches. And they were these thick little books, and all of this stuff from the 30s and 40s.
Oh, wow.
All of a sudden was something I was exposed to. So how could I possibly do anything else? Well, I did. I decided to go into the theater, and
That's right.
was trained as a theater person, and had sort of, I think I was always had some influence from comic books then. I certainly did well with scenery design, that sort of thing, but I wanted to be a director, and I had been drawing all these years, and I could storyboard a theater piece, and decided to go to New York after I got done with college and try to break into directing, and I needed a day job. And a friend of mine said, well, you used to read comic books, and they've become very popular lately, and I really had not read them for years. And he said, why don't you consider that you might be able to draw comic books? And I looked at them and said, oh boy, I'm not good enough to do this, because what he showed me was Barry Smith's Conans.
Oh,
Ooh.
A bunch of, because of course he was picking out the very best stuff.
Yeah.
And Neil Adams at that time was drawing everything in the world. He was, I think the first Neil Adams I saw was not his DC stuff, but he had just done a couple of the Skrull Kree War.
Okay.
That Roy Thomas was doing. So I saw him do the Marvel characters. Jack Kirby had just gone over to DC. John Buscema was doing all of Marvel's, anything they could have him do, they had to do. And then Bernie Wrightson and Jeff Jones and people like that were, it was a heyday time for a lot of people. And
a lot of great artists then.
And I was saying, I'm not good enough to do this, but I want to, because it sort of put together everything I had always wanted to do, you could do in comic books. And so I started putting portfolios together and going to conventions and showing them to people. I am always grateful to Jerry Conway, because he was patient and looked at my portfolio and was the first person that was of that prominence in the business who said, yeah, I think you got a future in this. Just keep at it. He said, I'm not hiring people. I don't, am not, but you'll get there. And then I think Leighton and Stern saw some pieces that I did, and I appeared in a couple of their fanzines at that time, and finally got some work from Charlton. And John Buscema at that point was Stan had talked to him about doing a book about drawing comics, which became How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way.
Mm-hmm.
And John felt that he couldn't help write that book. Well, basically, he wrote the book, and Stan did the snappy patter. And Stan can't draw, we know that, but well, he can't. But he was a good critic of art. Man, he knew what needed to be there. And so John felt he had to teach a class, and he taught it twice. And the first year, there was an ad in the back of Marvel Comics and said, show up at this hotel and bring a portfolio. And I did, and got in the class. And at the end of the class, John got me the job at Marvel.
Nice.
So, nice. That's a pretty good...
So that's the entire story of how I got interested in comic books.
So Bob, with that class and getting the job at Marvel, what was the first book that they put you on? What was your first published Marvel work?
Well, it was really, I don't like to criticize it because people now bring me this and said, oh, this is just the best. I saw this when I was a kid and I loved it. And I look at it and say, oh my God, I thought they would fire me. That's right. I turned this in. But it was the Champions. And I think because I had studied with John, who was really the ultimate group artist, because he could not only did them well, but he could do them fast. I did not do the Champions well, and I did it slow. And the idea that I was doing a group book was sort of enjoyable, but at the same time, how does anybody do this in 2.5 weeks? And thank God they got me off it after about, I think, 3-4 issues, and I was doing Supervillain Team Up, which was a much better fit. But the Champions was strange anyway. One of the strangest groups ever concocted.
Yeah, you look at the lineup of that, and it's not really a bunch of characters that you would think would be together.
Well, Tony Isabella says that it was his idea, and his first thought about it was that it was a buddy book, but between the Iceman and the Angel, who because X-Men had been canceled, and he thought it would be like Route 66, and they would travel around having adventures. They would meet people, and the powers that be kept adding people to the group.
Oh,
and
wow.
The last straw was Ghost Rider, who, I mean, it was a strange group anyway. Hercules was in it. I've never thought Hercules belonged in. Even later when he was in the Avengers, he didn't belong there. But he really didn't belong in. No, none of these characters really quite belonged. I think it was Hercules, the Black Widow, a woman.
Was it Valkyrie or was that Defenders?
No, that was Defenders. This was one who I don't think she had much of a career thereafter, although a lot of people have get revived since I stopped working for Marvel. It's amazing how many characters have popped up. I just can't remember her name right now. Somebody out there knows who she was.
Let us know in the comments, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, and who else was in that? The two X-Men, and and then Ghost Rider, who is the ultimate loner.
Mm-hmm.
He just doesn't belong in a group book, and he was
Darkstar, was that it?
What?
Darkstar?
Darkstar, thank you.
I was trying to look it up too.
And at that time, first of all, he wasn't doing his nice Harley. He was in that sort of strange skull uh, cycle,
Mhm.
and I can understand why. It was the idea that he had originated as a stunt writer, and nobody did stunt writers. Not that I know of much on a Harley chopper, uh, but it was not a very interesting bike to draw. Plus, I am not a motorcycle person, and I thought, oh my God, got to draw a motorcycle, and I had not yet learned that you don't. Something like a motorcycle immediately is intimidating because you look at all the detail and think, how I don't even know how it works, uh, and you realize eventually when you're doing comics that you have to be able to lay out absolutely anything without reference. Now that doesn't mean you don't use reference eventually, but that to like I'm staring right now at a cover idea I'm working on for somebody that has an independent one, and it's a his
Oh, cool.
funny animal character, and I'm in it, and he's riding a motorcycle. And to get that pose with the motorcycle, you have to be able to just lay it out as two circles, a rectangle on the back that people sit in, a football-shaped thing that contains gasoline, a couple of tubes running around that they held on to, and some exhausts, and you got a motorcycle. Now, that doesn't mean you don't go back to reference then thereafter and add the detail.
Yeah.
But like most duffers, your first impulse is to start drawing detail. Like uh, if I would know enough now, probably, that if I were to try to draw either one of you, I would draw the shape of your head first.
I got a big head, so.
And then the shape, then within that, the shape of your nose and the shape of your beard, rather than starting with those, finally get into those fine details. But if you start with those, you'll do two eyes, then you'll do a nose, and then you'll discover that the nose doesn't fit with the eyes. And, so learning to lay something out is significant. But at the time, I went out and had to buy little plastic motorcycles and look at them and try to figure out how to get this done. He was in an office, and the office was supposed to be on fire. And drawing an office was difficult because my wife had to let me into her, where she was working part-time for an office, and said, can he come in and make sketches? Because I didn't know what, I knew in a sense what would be in an office, but I'd never drawn it. Who'd ever draw just
Yeah.
around drawing an office? And you find out, the very first thing you find out when you do comics is that you must be able to draw absolutely anything, and that you are going to be asked to draw stuff that you never even thought you'd be drawing, and that you have it's not in your sketchbook or anything like that. It's a little easier now because you can look stuff up on the internet, but back then you couldn't. And something like an office, even like you can go to the New York Public Library, and they have a great picture reference section. But even they didn't have stuff like an office. Even they are pick and choose what's interesting, and so that was pretty hard, the first few things. And it takes you too long. You think you're going to get fired because you really must be able to do a comic book in about 2 weeks. And it took me over a month to do that first comic.
Oh, wow.
And eventually I realized that, with a few exceptions like John Byrne, who sort of came in to Marvel full grown and able to do anything, almost everybody was late with their first thing, and it was sort of expected. They preferred that you not be, but the expectation was that you were going to screw up those first few things that you did.
Yeah.
and that if they liked especially if they liked your storytelling,
Yeah.
that you could maintain the job. But it was it was. I only realized that after I think after I became an editor and watched other people suffering, that I wasn't the only person that ever went through this
There you
process.
go.
Well, yeah, I wanted to ask about that too, because you started as an artist, and that's what you built your career on, as an artist and as a writer. But you did have that brief period of time at Marvel where you were an editor. So how did how did you get that job?
I had written a play. I sort of, um, surprisingly enough, because I sort of thought, well, am I going to try to keep on with the theater career? But I had actually, about the same time I got into Marvel, I had gotten my first job as a resident director for a theater company in New York, and did that for a year and a half. It was a little bit too much to be trying to do both, and I decided I would focus more on the comic. But ended up, I won't get into how it happened, but I ended up working with another guy, and we wrote a version of Dracula that ran off Broadway for 2 years and was quite a hit.
That was The Passion of Dracula.
Mm-hmm. And Shooter saw it and liked it very much and said, "Well, you can write as well as draw, and I need somebody." This is just when Shooter became the editor in chief, and one of the first things he did, because this was the time of the rotating editors, the editor in chief ship of Marvel had become a revolving door,
Mm-hmm.
and after Stan uh, left to with he Stan had a lot of foresight, and I think he knew that he was going to have to get out to Hollywood and start, even back then, promoting the idea that these would become media things, and so. And he was probably just sick of being the editor in chief too. I would think, because he could still write his soapbox, and as long as he could do that, and so I think it was Roy Thomas took it over, and then somewhere along that line, it became, because it was sort of out of control. There were too many titles for one editor to edit, so they tried the writer editor system with the major writers editing their own books, which meant that nobody was telling them this is late, and everything became later and later and later and later, and except for a few people like Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
And when he came back to Marvel, he was always ahead of the game. And Jim, quite rightly, when he became editor in chief, he was sort of an inevitability. He was this young man who was around the office and being the assistant to anybody that took over the editorship. But it was just clear that sooner or later Jim was going to get that job, because I think he was probably the only person that really wanted that job and was very capable of doing it. And he realized that Marvel was going to be in really terrible trouble if it didn't get on time, and that to do that, the writer-editor system had to end, and that he needed assistant editors, so that you would be editing 10 books and the next guy would be editing 10 books and Jim Salicrup would be editing 10 books.
Like Tom DeFalco and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, although that was a little bit before DeFalco. This was before that. And so he approached me about doing it, and I said, this play that I'm doing we're still running. And I said, it's going to get done in London. And there's no question about it. I'm going to go to London to see that production and to be around when it's being done. We weren't doing the production, but I definitely wanted to see it and be involved with it. And so I said, I can't do it. And he, at first, I think he thought I was negotiating, so he kept offering me more money. And I finally said, well, I could do it for 6 months. And he said, great, just give me 6 months and then I'll, because I just need to, by that time we'll have books on time
Hmm.
and it's okay. So that's how I ended up doing it. And one of the reasons I didn't want to do it was that I knew that there was a good chance that I would end up having to fire people who were behind and couldn't get caught up and replace them with people who were faster.
Hmm.
And that indeed happened. And it was not my favorite thing to do. On the other hand, being able to be in the office, in the bullpen, I sort of avoid using the word bullpen because the the bullpen that Stan described was a mythical, non-existent. But there was a bullpen, and it was filled with a lot of old hands who just were astonishing to be around. Marie Severin, Vince Coletta, uh, Jack Abel, Frank Giacoya, um, just people who were amazing at what they could do, and so that was fun. And you'd get to see all this stuff come through the office. You learned a lot about penciling just by looking at pencils
Hmm.
that came in from, and they would range from these soft, beautifully chiaroscuro work that Gene Colan would do to these amazing breakdowns that John Buscema was doing mainly at the time, but they were beautiful, beautiful little line drawings. They just didn't have any black areas in them, but uh, since he was working a lot with Tom Palmer, he didn't really need to do that. Uh, he could do that kind of breakdown work, and they were just beautiful. Um, uh, Various other people would walk through just, and then there were people who just would come up to visit. John Belushi was a big comic fan and came to the Marvel offices, and that ended up in Chris Claremont pitching the idea of doing Spider-Man meets the not ready for primetime players, as Saturday Night Live was called at that time. And fortunately, I was editing Team Up, which is
That's right. It was a Marvel team up issue.
And
right.
that's one you got to draw, right?
Well, I wasn't going to let anybody else draw it but me, because I knew we were going to get to go to 30 Rock and meet all those people, and I was a big fan, and I thought, hey, okay, we get some perks here. And in fact, Belushi eventually invited us to the opening night party for Animal House, and we got to
Wow,
go and give him the cover.
Wow, that's
that's
amazing.
awesome.
That was a thrill.
So let me ask you, when you were in England, how long were you in England for? And while you were over there, did that influence your artistic style or your writing style, even?
Um, Gee, I don't know. It certainly influenced the fact anywhere you are, unless you're absolutely going to close yourself down and hermetically seal off the rest of the world, is going to affect what it is you do. Um, I had been doing Shadowman, and we got to a point where a very strange thing happened, where I considered it a strange thing. I was called into the office one day and told, you've been doing him wrong. And I said, yeah, because I had gotten nothing but praise about the book. And yeah, and I was told that he needed to be more African American. And I said, well, there's certainly a lot of African American characters in Shadowman. And Jack Boniface is a person of color, but he's a Creole with a very specific New Orleans culture.
Hmm.
And I looked back at the first issues, and he was always done that way and colored that way. I didn't do the first 6 issues, and couldn't figure out what was going on. And then somewhere in the middle of the night, one of those times you woke up and said, I know, we're now owned by Acclaim video games company. And and I knew they were planning a Shadowman game, and they've just done demographics and assumed that they can do better with an African American character in the lead. So I suggested that I do something to end Jack Boniface's reign as Shadowman in some way, and so that they could logically reboot the series.
Okay, that was the end of the first era of Valiant, moving into the stuff that was more connected with video games and multimedia and stuff like that.
Right, and that was problematic. I mean, apparently, I opened my big mouth at the first. There was a meeting with the president of Acclaim, and I remember him saying, "Now the purpose I want you to think about this. That the purpose of this company is now to create icons for us to make into games." And apparently, I said, "Oh, that's okay, but if we don't tell good stories, you're probably not going to have a comic book company."
They wanted quantity over quality at that point, and it showed. I mean, the artwork was really flashy on titles like Bloodshot and Exo Manowar and stuff like that, but some of the titles really did suffer from a lack of consistency with stories.
And it was, it was exactly, how do you write an icon? I mean, basically it was, I think it was very difficult to come up with stories. And apparently, I don't remember saying that, but any number of people have told me that was the conversation that happened, and it turned out to be pretty accurate that was what happened. But anyway, I gave before I ever took it over, the character had been told, and editors and writers, if you're out there, do not tell a character early on that he's going to die in a certain year. That's very inhibiting if the character becomes kind of popular as to how do you get him out of that. But I decided that was going to prey on his mind, and that he would have a nervous breakdown, really, and be obsessed with, can I die before 1999, and had him jump off a building in the tallest building that I could find in New Orleans, and left him halfway down, and thinking they can decide what they want to do now. I have a scheme for how he gets out of it and survives, and had set that up, and or they can just have him go squish and go on. And as near as I can tell, they did nothing, absolutely nothing at all, and that he's still there, suspended halfway down. I did for Dinesh, when they did the new Valiant, they were for a while wanting some of the original creators to write and draw stories that would go in compendiums they were going to do of the original Valiant material. And I did write, and they bought a story about how he got out of it. But
nice.
But they never, just at that point, they decided that they didn't want to, that somehow, I guess they felt it was going backwards to deal with the old Valiant characters and the old Valiant creators. And so it never happened.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, let's go ahead and go right back to where you came into Valiant for a little bit. Like, what was the conversation? Why did they choose you, or you chose Shadowman to work on? Because your work on Shadowman made that book one of the most prominent books in the original Valiant universe. Right alongside Bloodshot and Exo Manowar, Shadowman was right there, the trinity of Valiant. So what was the discussion on how you got to Shadowman?
I got to Shadowman because Marvel wasn't giving me any work. Bluntly, it was very briefly, they had the last significant thing I did for Marvel was they wanted me to do a Nick Fury series, and I really wanted to do it, but because I loved the character and blah blah blah. But I had other commitments at the time, and told them I can do this, but it's going to be really tight. And at the when I turn in, I'm going to let you know how it's going. When I turn in that first issue, I've got to have the next one ready, or I'll never be able to make the deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
And that was agreed to, but it never happened. The There just wasn't a book waiting for me, a script waiting for me, and then I said, okay, I can, if it's as long as it happens this week. But at the end of the week, there was no script.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, beginning of next week, I have to have the script if they can get it done this. And it never happened. And I finally said, I can't do it now. I'll never be able to get it done. I just won't be able to get it done. And if I look back, I think probably it was a foolish move. I think I could have done it maybe in breakdown and succeeded, but
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not sure. I don't know what the deal was. Whether somehow it had never been communicated to the writer, but the writer was Bob Harris, who became editor-in-chief of Marvel, and I think he felt that I had screwed him over, and so I just wasn't getting any work.
Wow.
And I think that had a lot to do with it. I don't know that, and I haven't seen Harris ever since then. And he's welcome if he ever hears this story to say, no, that isn't the deal. But we just thought you were a crappy artist. But anyway, I called Jim, who said, whenever you want to do some work for Valiant, get a hold of me. And I had done a little bit of off and on work for Valiant, doing some of their wrestling posters and stuff like that. But I hadn't done any stories for them. And he said, well, we don't really need artists as badly as we need writers right now. Why the hell haven't you ever written a comic book? You write plays. Why aren't you writing a comic book? And I thought, well, I don't know. Nobody asked me. And he said, well, take your choice of, and I think he had 5 different titles. And they just were, that expanded faster than they thought. And so I looked them all over, and Shadowman seemed to be, first of all, it was set in New Orleans. It was not a group book. And it wasn't working. Something just, it had a lot of potential, but something had not quite gelled with it ever. And
yeah, those first couple issues were a little shaky, but you can tell when you came on there and started to craft.
Yeah, and so that made me feel, well, hey, it's my first writing job. If I make the book work, I'm going to look awfully good. If I don't make the book work, I'm in pretty damn good company, because it wasn't that they were bad people doing it. It was just, I think everybody was spread too thin.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I think that the initial idea for it was Steve Englehart's, and there was some sort of falling out or something. By the time I was involved with it, Englehart, I don't think Englehart would ever actually did one of the issues, but I think the concept, now I could be wrong about that, but I think the concept, the basic concept was him, as you could see when later on when he did a character called Nightman, who was very the Shadowman. And I felt I had to just figure out my own way to do it. And one of the good things about it was that it was, it felt very open for doing that. And I felt that there was basically I took the idea that, well, what if this was just a guy. He's a musician and a pretty good one, and plays the saxophone, but he probably plays better than Bill Clinton, but he's still, you know, uh, an interesting character. There are layers to him, and well, in drama and in comics, I think the pertinent word is always as if.
Mm-hmm.
Playing the if game is, if something did happen to a character and he became something at night that he couldn't explain, how would he deal with that? And I thought, why is he wearing blue long underwear? As the very first thing he does. Why does every character do that? Why don't they just go to their closet and put on something, or down to the nearest thrift store and make up something for themselves?
And I love that change about him. Like, it was after Unity, I believe, is when he changed into the more regular clothes costume. He still had the mask and all that stuff, but that was so cool with him.
And even the mask, I had him, you know, there with a X-Acto knife, carving out a little bit of it, because he said, I can't breathe in this darn thing. But it was also so I could give him some expression, you know.
Yep.
He had, otherwise he would have this dead face. And I think there are not very many characters that manage great popularity with that. Spider-Man being one of the few exceptions that really the whole face is covered, but it's covered in such a way that you almost read expressions into it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they were brilliant when they did the movie version this time, that the eyes could
move.
Yeah. Didn't make any sense, but who cared? You know, it was perfect. And so, plus, what were his powers? And that had never really been made clear. And I said, well, what if they change? What if they're an evolving kind of thing, rather than being something that just all of a sudden, oh man, I can go fast now. You know, what if they never were quite solidified? And it just seemed like a fun way to go with something, because for one thing, working with the Marvel characters, they could certainly be developed, and people who wrote them would try to write them. The best writers would write them with some layers to them and some depth to them, but they were still trademarks.
Mm-hmm.
And Shadowman was one of the first things I worked on that wasn't a trademark. It didn't have to be this or that. It could be whatever the load would bear at the time. So that was fun. But just to get back to the England thing for a minute, when I finished Shadowman, I could go on and did Armed and Dangerous, which was not set in England. It was set in the West Side with the Westies, who were the Irish West Side Mafia. But certainly the fact that I lived in England, and then I lived in Ireland for a year, and then I lived in England for another year. So it was a total of 3 years over there. And certainly the effect of living in Ireland was very helpful to writing that book. But it was also just a chance to be completely free of already established characters.
Mm-hmm.
Great fun to be doing something that was entirely mine.
Well, going back, a little bit, before Valiant, when you were at Marvel, one thing, one issue that you mentioned to us before, we started this, you said you're always asked about, and considering that it's one of the most, it's an iconic issue of Avengers. It's a major,
Yeah.
But it's a major character, a major character point for one of the founding, or two of the founding Avengers. Was you drew the issue when Hank Pym, when he was Yellow Jacket, when he smacks Wasp and then he gets kicked out of the Avengers. Like, what was that like working on that as the time? Did you have a sense of the impact? I mean, and the impact that it would have long term?
No, not remotely. It was a difficult one to draw, and I wrestled a lot with with that slap of exactly how it should be done. I would do it. Jim, of course, says he never intended her to be slapped. I don't remember it that way, but because I don't think I would have had him slap her if that was the case. But it could have been kind of non-specific because this was the Marvel method, would occasionally get to be a victim of vagary.
Mhm.
That you would be doing what you were sure was the thing to be doing, and then it would turn out that it wasn't at all what the writer. I don't think it happened very often, but it did happen. So I won't contradict him except to say that I think it's a better story if he slaps her, but that I would probably not have done such a roundhouse right, even maybe 5 years afterwards. But I had just gone through, that you got, when you started with Marvel, you ushered, at that time, and this was wonderful. You got ushered into Stan's office. He would do the whole business standing on his desk and demonstrating how much more dynamic a Marvel comic was than a DC. Yeah. And he was like, it was all about kind of 19th century acting, where people would have certain poses that seemed to indicate emotions, and everything was big.
Yeah.
And when I studied with John, he was all about it. Hey, if you're drawing a punch in a Marvel comic, you don't look at a boxer, you look at a tennis guy and the follow through of a tennis racket. And think about it, makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought. I thought, should I do it more? Because I was thinking, gee, if this were being done in Green Lantern, I know how Neil would do it, and it would be very real. But we're doing it as the Avengers, and they're superheroes, and they have superpowers. I'll bet I ought to just have him really whack her.
Oh my God.
And so I did.
The slap heard round the world.
And so there it was. And I don't know till this day. It's like, first of all, it's amazing to me that people still bring it up and say, what was it? Was that? Did you do it the way Jim wanted it, or did you do it go off in your own? I don't remember. I was probably up till 4 a.m, and finally said, "Okay, that's it. That's what I'm going to do with it." And Jim's a birthday sketchbook was just created for Jim, who's really one of my best friends in the business. And I think we've agreed to argue over this endlessly until the day we die. But people were asked to do various sketches, and I asked the person who his handler, a young woman that works with him now and takes him in hand, which is good. And she organized the thing, and she said, "This is great." She said, "A lot of people don't understand what you just drew, but Jim will think it's great." And it was the Wasp and Yellow Jacket standing next to each other, their arms folded, looking kind of up sideways at each other. And she says, "You slapped me." And he said, "I did not." "You did?" "I didn't." "No, you really did. Just look at the comic book." "Oh, wait, that wasn't me. That was the artist."
Wow.
Well,
So, go ahead, Dean.
But I think I can understand. I think Jim's very sensitive about the whole, because I know he got, for reasons I do not remotely understand, accused of being in favor of wife beating.
Yeah.
And I don't understand. It was very clearly the opposite. I think it was that a beloved character, it was as if your parents just got a divorce,
Mm-hmm.
and people were really, really upset by it because they'd come to love these characters.
Yeah.
I'm just pleased that we did something that's so iconic that people are still talking about it. Why not?
Yeah, I mean that was a major turning point for one of the founding Avengers.
I also think it was a major turning point in comics, period, that it was taking what Stan did, which was these people can have real problems in their lives, and just taking it one step further.
Yep.
Because there still was a sense that if you were a comic book character and you got married, you started living in Leave It to Beaver world. And or Father Knows Best, and all of a sudden it became very. I think the word is anodyne. Something that had no teeth to it.
Yeah.
And Jim liked things with teeth to him. And
I mean, with
one of the things that made Marvel so good when he was the editor in chief, I think, was that he backed things that had some bite.
Yeah.
Well, with big books like that, I mean, you need the dynamic of the superhero fights and all that stuff too. But like you just said, these characters are supposed to be real people with real problems, and that's a problem. I mean,
Yeah.
you have those kind of issues in life and things like that, and to see it from time to time in a comic book, especially a major title like the Avengers, not only is jarring, but it has lasting effect too.
And I think that it's something that, in a way, Marvel is wrestling with now in their media presentations. Is there's become a sort of template, as much as they try to break out of it, of everything has to build to a earth-shaking,
Yeah.
cataclysmic, and it probably does, because it's not a comic book where you buy one every month. And one of the brilliance of Stan's, and then it continued on, but I think it was a Stan thing and a Ditko thing, not so much a Kirby thing, but a Ditko thing, that the soap opera part of the comic became very, very significant. And I don't mean soap opera as a derogatory term.
No.
But you're following that month by month, and that became almost as interesting. The cliffhangers were sometimes what's going to happen with Daredevil's relationship, blah blah blah, and that enabled you not to have everything. Not everything had to be a Galactus comic.
Yeah.
It like what we just described. That became a very important story, and it had nothing to do with this gigantic James Bond ending that
Right.
would have to occur.
Sometimes you just needed the light to get turned off at the end of the issue when they're walking out of the room, and that's it.
That's good. That's it. That's very good. Good way to put it.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, when you were at Marvel, you worked on a lot of stuff, but I think primarily, I think of your work there as you worked on a lot of Avengers and Avengers related titles. And in '87, you did the Marvel graphic novel, which I just really wish they would still do something like that. But you did the one Emperor Doom, and I saw on your website, which anybody that wants to check it out, and you right here at bobhall.com, I saw on your website you believe that is your best work that you've done at Marvel. So what is it about that book that stood out to you among all the other work that you've done there?
Well, first of all, there's the character Dr. Doom. I had, like I said, I went from the Champions to supervillain team up, and so I had a strong feeling about who Doom was going in, because I'd had numerous chances to work on him before. And I liked the story. I don't know if it was the first time I'd worked with Michelinie. I've lost track, but I certainly enjoyed working with him on that. He gave me plenty of opportunity to contribute to the story, which I was grateful for. And it was out of continuity, which meant that there was not a rigid deadline with it. So we had plenty of time to do it, which gave me the chance to ink it myself.
Nice.
Your work on it spectacular.
And so that was good as well, because I've always thought that I'll pencil something, and I think this is a bit of a if I have the most specific failing I think that I sometimes have as an artist is that I'll pencil stuff, and my pencils, the blacks will be in the right place, the draftsmanship will for the most part be pretty good, but the style that I would work in is not necessarily there. And I when I ink something, there are people who, you look at John Burns' pencils and they look like how it's going to turn out if he inks it, or if unless and as long as it's a good inker, or if anybody inks it. Same is true with, for instance, Colin. Same is true with Adams. Buscema, not as much because he did so much breakdowns work. But my stuff, I found that I'll go in with the ink, and it almost feels like a different drawing when I'm done.
Wow.
And I was pleased to be able to ink my own work for a change. I only forgot, I think, a couple of covers, an issue of what was it? Oh, it was What If Conan. It's the What If comic. What If Conan?
Oh,
After the 20th century, the second part, and I got to ink that, but not very often. In fact, I wanted to learn something about inking, so I assigned myself to ink over Sal Buscema's Tarzan, and learned. I'm glad I got to do that before I did Emperor Doom, because I really learned a lot about inking then at that point. But so that was part of the reason, but it also just was. I think the concept was interesting to me. Also, and it was something that held my interest. In fact, I got a big thrill probably 9 years ago. There was I like reading political commentary every day. There was a guy named Leonard Pitt who works out of Florida, Miami Herald, I think, and I read his, and he was in my local paper, syndicated, and I read his commentary one day, and he made reference to Emperor Doom.
Oh,
and I thought, well, hey, we did something right with that.
Well, when you were working with Marvel, I know Dan's going to ask you a whole bunch about West Coast Avengers, and I will leave that totally to him. But what I want to ask you about is the New Universe. So when you went to do New Universe, you worked on DP7, if I remember right. Do you want to give us a little bit of insight into how that was, and did New Universe feel like a precursor to what eventually became the Valiant universe?
On the second question, absolutely, but only in retrospect. At first, the work that I did there felt like, I guess even working on it, I felt it was wrong for Marvel, because we already had the New Mutants, and it was arguably the same kind of idea, but different.
Right.
And I can understand why Jim wanted to go with it. I think he felt mutants sometimes, that the mutants quickly became good at what they did, efficient at what they did, became a hero group. And when he did, what's the name of the Valiant version? It's not Phoenix. It's
Secret Weapons or
No,
Harbinger.
Harbinger. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Harbinger, I think he hit with that and was able to develop that concept that they were they had powers, but what do I do with these? Why are
Mhm.
people after us? Where are we going? And I thought that was where he wanted to go with the new universe, and just never quite gelled in the same way. But I think that was part of the problem is that I know how he felt, because remember I said that it was so great to be working on something that wasn't a trademark
Mhm.
and that could go this way or that way, and you didn't know somebody was going to die.
Yeah.
Maybe these characters don't have there was no rule that Shadowman couldn't die, and there was no rule that anybody in the new universe couldn't die. And I think ultimately, um, death is one of the important potential features for characters, and one of the things that kind of it can be very difficult. Lives are at stake in this stuff,
Mhm.
except that probably no member of the Fantastic Four is going to die.
Yeah.
Or
Because
if they do, it'll be for a short time.
yes, it'll be a Marvel death.
Die.
Yeah, and I think Marvel has both. When they came up with the Winter Soldier, it was both. The good thing for them is it really worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bad thing was that it finally settled it. Okay, even Bucky death is not death, because I always said that there was a Marvel death and then there was Bucky death.
Yeah.
Somebody quite brightly said, "No, we can bring him back too," and I think almost a challenge. Um, but he then it was great. Although I got to say that I kind of liked him better than the $6 million man, but he was a combination of the $6 million man and Jason Bourne. But it worked somehow. It worked, and nobody really complained a lot. But in the Valiant universe, everybody was vulnerable,
Right.
and I think that was really fun.
Now I know a concept from New Universe was that for every issue a month would pass in real time and
Mhm.
then it would carry over. I know that carried over into Valiant for a little while, but not for too long. Is that right?
That's that. I didn't pay any attention to it.
Right on.
In the case of the new universe, uh, uh, it was being scripted for me,
Hmm.
and I just did what was in the script. I very seldom contributed much to the new universe. I don't think, in terms of ideas and stuff.
Gotcha.
I basically felt that one was a job of work, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed being those characters. But whether it whether at the time I was aware that monthly thing, or whether I was not aware, I really don't know. Um, and certainly in the case of Shadowman, I pretty quickly just went wherever I felt I needed to go. I did not like some of the timers. There were a few things about the Valiant universe that, as they started, there were some certain rules, and I think some of them were very nice because they kept you from going off into the ether somewhere.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think they would occasionally kind of get in the way, and uh, the ones that got in the way sort of slowly, osmotically disappeared,
Well,
which is logical. I mean, why not?
yeah.
It just only makes sense.
Well, thank God for that because, like I said, Shadow Man was one of the top tier Valiant titles, and I am so glad that I got to enjoy the stories that you created on that.
Well, thank you. I really was proud of my work on that book, and I loved that I could go so many different directions with it.
Mhm.
I would felt able to do really that it was a book about magic, but then do some issues where it wasn't about magic at all.
Yeah.
Well, Tim had mentioned, that I would be asking about West Coast Avengers, and he is absolutely correct about that. As the guys on the station know, it was always a big West Coast Avengers fan. So, you drew the initial 4-issue miniseries before it was a regular title. Was it always intended that the miniseries would lead into a regular book, or was it just something they were like, we're going to do this and see what happens?
Oh, yeah, I think more the latter. Um, it certainly had the potential for doing that, but I certainly don't think there was any decision made at the time that I was doing it that it was going to go monthly, or I think I would have put in my bid to keep doing it. As it was, I think I was doing something else. I think Squadron Supreme by the time it finally went monthly. If that's assuming that they would have wanted me to do it, but I would presume maybe they would have. But I don't even think Roger did the first did the and it was certainly his pitch.
I think Steve Englehart was the one that wrote the ongoing when it started.
Mm-hmm. And so yeah, I it, it I don't think there was a sense that it was. There certainly was a sense that if it really really worked, anything that really really worked was probably going to go monthly.
Yeah.
But
do you remember how they? I was say, do you remember how they chose which characters were going to be on that team as opposed to, that they were going to take away from the core team and put on that one?
no, I have no idea. I know from in the begin. I know that for the miniseries, it just seemed there was a certain logic to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that of Hawkeye always seemed comfortable around a barbecue, and the odd person out I think was Iron Man, who was Rhodey at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
the Silver Centurion armor.
But I think that made him. Well, he wasn't in the miniseries. He was still.
Oh, it wasn't.
He was
Okay, I
wearing,
guess that was the regular series.
yeah, he was wearing the old regular
The
original,
gold and red.
original gold, yeah, and red outfit that somehow magically. I always loved that magically. All I could figure out was I don't know, but nobody ever really questioned it much as to how did it all become like muscles. And all I could figure out was it was a special Hank Pym plastic or something, or a Tony Stark invention or something that was not made. It was clearly not made out of metal. But and it was very important that you not think about that too much.
I'm looking at my Iron Man action figure over there right now, and now I'm going to think about nothing but that Hank Pym particles to connect the gauntlets and the boots and all that stuff.
Right.
Well, you mentioned. Oh no, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, just Wonder Man was very logical for him to be a stuntman.
Yeah.
Mockingbird, well, she's married to Hawkeye, but it's Hollywood. You need one blonde. It was as opposed to the champions. It was almost a perfectly melded group. I think if you were going to send a group off to L.A., this was a good one to have done that with. And then they all seem to make a little bit of sense. Iron Man, I think mainly because it was a different person inside the suit, and somehow that getting away from that core group that Iron Man was a part of would make sense to him, especially with that. So I think that worked very nicely.
Well, you mentioned that after you did the miniseries, and I remember, when I spoke with you briefly at Baltimore Comic-Con this past year, you said that the reason you didn't do the ongoing series was because you were working on Squadron Supreme. So, For me, Squadron Supreme, I always put that up there as like one of the top tier, best comic series that are out there. That came around the mid 80s when they were doing, it doesn't get the attention that like Dark Knight or Watchmen get, but the themes and the stuff that was happening in that book is, was right up there with it. So what was it like working on that book with Mark Runewater? And you talked about penciling team books. I mean, that was one that certainly had a big cast of characters in it.
Mhm.
I eventually burned out on it. And I'll be blunt about that. I loved doing it, and I really, really spent probably more time on that than I ever did on a monthly book, just trying to do something with it. I loved that the characters were relatively unknown, so that I could find imagery sometimes in real people, sometimes in actors, sometimes in just, I would look through photographs till I found, for instance, Power Princess. I just didn't want her to look just like Wonder Woman facially, so I found a very famous, I can't think of her name right now, a female bodybuilder, one of the first ones, and before they really started getting to be, outsized
Mhm.
muscles, and worked with that, and the the Archer what just had a little bit of Sylvester Stallone going for him. And,
Okay.
Nighthawk was Gregory Peck, and
Okay.
Wow.
I can see that.
and I was in no case trying to do a portrait, you know. Uh, but I wanted other images other than that standard Marvel face where you only could tell the characters apart by their uniforms. Uh, so I really worked on that, and I just was very happy with the work. And then somehow, somewhere when the other group came in, um, there were so many characters that I felt like the last third of it, I just felt I couldn't do it anymore. I was killing myself doing it, and
Wow.
so much so that I thought even if I were to say I'll do it and break down, which again I could look back and say I wish I had done that, and then I'd say why didn't you do that? Well, I was fried. I was just fried. By the time I was working that, it was, you needed George Perez, or in the case of Paul Ryan, he did a wonderful job
Yeah.
with working in all of those characters. But I also had one problem with the book, which was that I lost a little bit of interest. The one thing Mark really liked to do, and that fans really loved, and that I could care less about, is matching up this hero's powers with this villain's powers. And eventually these big fights became about somebody has the ability to counteract this person,
Mhm.
this and that. And I don't know, I just found that not very interesting. And I think my imagination was burning out too, perhaps. But that was the one thing about the series that I didn't care for, was when it got into that part. And I thought, gee, it'd be great if somebody else were doing that one.
Well, that reminds me of when Jamie, one of the other members of Codex, the founder of Codex, him and I sat down and talked to Daryl Banks. He worked on Green Lantern. And he said pretty much similar to what you just said about getting burnt out with the series that he was working on. And that leads me to this question. Your time at DC, there's not a whole lot in your portfolio for that. But what I want to ask is, what was the difference between working at Marvel versus working at DC? And even if you want to throw in working at Valiant, what was the difference between the three? And why
Oh,
did you choose to go over to DC for the time that you did?
oh well, the clarity. There's a clarity on that, which is I was writing it as well, and that was a big difference. Um, the um, I just never wrote for Marvel.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I by the time I didn't feel welcome at Marvel anymore. Maybe that was just me being paranoid, but
I have heard that more often than not, though. Like Marvel has kind of the sense that if they're done with you, they're done with you, and they just give you less and less until they don't give you anymore.
which could be, I don't know. I was never that good at, if I look back at one thing that I feel I didn't do as well as I should have, which was just communicating
Mm-hmm.
to I was never, until I started writing my own stuff, I never felt powerful. With a couple of exceptions at Marvel, I always felt it's fascinating for me to get people who place me in a position with Marvel that I never felt I achieved. And I really appreciate that, but psychologically, I um, I never felt as like I was a first tier person at Marvel, and I felt that I was absolutely a first tier person at Valiant, and when I was working for Denny O'Neil at DC, and I suppose working with Denny, I'd never worked with Denny. I'd always liked Denny's work. I was pleased that when I went and said, "Do you got anything for me?" he knew who I was, and he knew my work and liked it, and basically went with the ideas that I pitched to him. And uh, looking back, I think, well, why wasn't I doing that a lot more when I was at Marvel? And I have no idea.
Well,
That's fair.
I know one thing you worked on at a Marvel. One of the things I have in my rack behind me, which I saw on your website, you said is an adaptation of what you believe to be the worst movie ever based on a comic. Was that you penciled the Captain America movie adaptation, and then Stan Lee did the script for it. So how did you get put on that book? What was it like adapting that movie? Which, Captain America is my favorite character, and as a kid, I was so excited just seeing a poster that this was going to come out. And then when I finally got it from the video store and watched it, I was like, "Wait, Red Skull's Italian, and who's this that created the super soldier serum? And why is Ned Beatty in here? Like, JD Salinger's kid is playing Captain America,
And the Red Skull looked like somebody had poured tomato paste on his head, which is maybe why he was. It's like,
yeah.
he became.
I'm just not going to tell either one of you that I thoroughly enjoyed that movie when I was younger.
Oh, I
mean, as a kid, I didn't know any better, and you got so few comics.
All you had, though.
And I was like, wow, look at the suit and this, but like even then, I kind of knew, like, what is this?
I did it for the reason I did it was for just some of the reasons that you were describing. Captain America was one of my favorite characters. He was the first, I think, truly iconic character that I got to do at Marvel, and I got to do him and the Submariner, I think, in the same book, and that was Dr. Doom, and that was and I've always loved doing Cap, and so when they said Captain America movie, I thought, wow, that's great. And then they said that Stan was going to do the adaptation. And I thought, well, I'll finally get a chance to interact with Stan. And then Stan read the script. And so I got through the editor. I got, can you do the adaptation? And Stan will write the dialogue. And so by that time it was sort of, that was what I was going to do. So I did it. And did the best I could with it, but it just didn't feel like it was Captain America. It felt like it was that thing of people who had no faith in the basic book, the basic tenet of it.
They didn't do any of their research. They didn't look at most of the source material and only took bits and pieces.
Or if they did, they sneered at it. I don't know. It puzzles you why. But it took that long. I think it really took until Sam Raimi did the first Spider-Man movie to say, oh, you mean that this can actually work, just done maybe like the comic book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That wasn't really Captain America. It was more like a motor pool private America.
Oh,
well,
wow.
and you look at the Captain America TV series, and it
Oh
wasn't.
yeah. The
And
red brown one with the motorcycle helmet. And
yeah,
and clear shield.
Really, none of them were except for the Hulk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's see here. Out of all the work that you've done, this will be my last question, and then I'll let Dan finish up. Out of all the work that you've done, what is the work that you've done that you're the most proud of?
Armed and Dangerous.
Okay.
Just
And
because it's different art style, an art style that was designed to be compatible with those stories. It was a chance to work in all kinds of things that I knew about. Some of them big, some of them little.
Mhm.
But for instance, when I first moved to New York, we lived on, well, we always did, on West 81st in the Upper West Side, and at that time it was not a good area. That's just why we could afford to live there. And so a couple of months after living at that address, I saw in the New York Post, where I was passing a newsstand and saw this headline about a severed head that had been found in a dryer.
Wow.
And then I looked more closely, and the dryer was a laundromat that I knew that was about 2 blocks away from us. And so I started reading the Post and said, I want to find out what the story is about that. Well, I never heard, it never came up ever again. It was a one-time story. So when my first story for Armed and Dangerous, I said, I'm gonna tell the story of how that head got in that dryer. And the theater area of New York butted right up against Hell's Kitchen, and so you were constantly meeting people in the bars and stuff around that area who were part of that whole Westies milieu, and you'd go by shows that were being put in on Broadway, and you'd see these guys sitting on there. These people working their butts off, and then there's these guys sitting on boxes reading the racing form, and the guys on the racing form where they were called walkers, meaning that they were they'd gotten into the union through whatever bribery or whatever, and they were part of the mob, and they would they would get paid for sitting there, and God forbid that they ever actually did any work, because they didn't know what they were doing. Their qualifications were racing forms, and that kind of stuff. And then there would be little teeny things like, I remember there was a bus trip that I would take out to New Jersey to do it. I worked at a theater out there, and you'd go, as you went through Weehawken, there was a motel with the motel sign that said "Love thy neighbor here," and I thought, well, that's got to go in a comic book. Just and you could throw that in the background and never mention it, and it was just lent again a richness to it that was there. That and Shadowman, I think they were two of my best things. There were
Awesome.
One thing I always like to ask artists is, I know you guys always get a lot of commission requests. So of all the commission requests you've gotten in your career, what would you say is the coolest one that you've gotten where you were like, yeah, that's gonna turn out really good? And which one or ones would you say are the kind of strangest or kind of out there ones where you're like, wait, what do you want me to draw?
I think the most out there one was a guy who collected uh, uh, commissions of the great Spider-Man villains being eaten by spiders.
Wow.
I don't have anything to say to that.
I
That's
know. What's to be said? And my first thought was, do I want to do this? And then I started to think about how I'd do it, and it was like, yeah, because I did the Green Goblin, and I had just one Green Goblin hand in the very foreground, being slowly having lots of spiders just carry it off.
Oh wow.
And then him in the background, and it was, so it turned out to be kind of fun, but I don't think I would want to do it as a steady diet. You would have night. The ones that I really like, I think just every once in a while I'll come up with something. Maybe I have a little bit of time or just an inspiration, and it just turns out to be really good. And that's about all I can say. Is just every once in a while you'll do one, and you. The danger with doing commissions is falling into a sort of by rote. I just started doing. I had somebody pose for me. There was somebody at a convention. It was a girl wearing a Hawkeye outfit, and she had and I had just gotten a Hawkeye request for a commission, and so I asked her if she would just do various poses with her bow, and because I realized I was always doing the same pose for Hawkeye, and that I needed to just shake that up a little bit. And he's the one that I get asked for the most, of course.
Yeah. So you showed that cover, at the start of this. That's something you're working on. Do you have any other upcoming projects you're working on? I know you don't really work on stuff that's steady in the industry anymore, but is there anything else you have coming up?
Just some more commissions, but I'm working on a couple of things, and we'll see if anything pans out that I'm writing. And I'm trying to put some stuff together that I'm hoping I'd like to get something done by midwinter.
Okay.
And see if I can hawk it around.
So I know I said I wouldn't ask another question, but I think I have to ask this. Are commissions open? And if so, can Dan and I be put at the front of the list?
You can be. And so for that, email me, because I need to get them all on my computer. And the minute we said, if you told me right now what you wanted, and I said yes, and it was not written down, I would be in trouble.
That is why I have Post-it notes.
Overall, I work with Scott Kress at Catskill Comics is my commission agent.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could go through him, but I wouldn't mind if I know somebody, I'm more than happy to let them just come through me.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna happen. So
I could say that one thing that I just started working on, I'll show you, is I wanted to do a jam piece of different Avengers, and each artist that I would have add to it, I've told them, like, you can draw whatever character you want, whatever costume you want, whatever pose you want, as long as at some point they were an Avenger. And I got 2 on there so far. I drew Captain America, since he's my favorite. And then at Baltimore Comic-Con this past year, I had Russ Braun add to it, and he added this Incredible Hulk.
Cool.
So yeah, it took me like 2 hours to draw that Captain America. It took him about 5 minutes to draw that Hulk, which tells you, you know, the reason he's a well-known professional artist and I'm not. So I would love to, if you're at Baltimore Comic Con next year, would love to get you to add a character to that as well.
Oh, sure. I'll be glad to.
Well, I hope I hope the stuff that you're working on is something that that gets published that we're able to see.
Well, one is something that I hope I will talk. Probably I'll try to find. Maybe I'll try to take it to Dark Horse first, but we'll see what happens. I'd like to do something that I own. And the other thing I'm working on is a play, and the play would be about the comic industry.
Oh,
In about 1955, when everything was going to hell because of seduction of the innocents. Or innocent. I always say innocence, but it's innocent.
Wow.
And that's the one I'm really kind of excited about, because it's like going back to the theater stuff. And
I mean, yeah, it's like a great way to combine your two passions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I'm sure that whenever you get any of that going, that you post it, the website, we showed here, the bobhall.com that posted on there. I know you also got the Facebook and Instagram we'll throw up here. And so people could check you out on there.
Mm-hmm. And once I'm done with your commissions, get them up on your sites.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of, you can find us online at thecodexstation.com. It's got links to all of our socials. It's got bios for all of us that do shows on here. It's got merch. It's got a ton of stuff there. Links to all the videos. So go check it out, everyone. Give us some follows, some likes. Let us know what you dig on there.
And I should say, or they'll kill me. The next two cons I do are Columbus, GalaxyCon Columbus in the first weekend in December, and Albuquerque. And you'll have to look that one up. But I think that's the first weekend in January, but it's first or second weekend. And then I'm already scheduling stuff, but that'll go up in my site pretty soon.
Nice. So anybody in Columbus and Albuquerque, keep an eye out. Bob Hall will be there.
I will be there.
And like you said, check him out on the website here. And yeah, I hope you're able to come back to Baltimore Comic Con next year.
I will certainly ask them. It's my favorite Comic Con. That and Heroes are my two favorites, I think. That one and one in Minot, North Dakota, believe it or not, but is a great Comic Con up there. But I love the ones that really, really care about artists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ones that are about comics and not about pop
culture.
Yes.
All right. Well, once again, I'm Dan. This has been Tim doing the interview with me, if I point the right way. And below us,
I'm Bob.
Comic book great, Bob Hall. Thank you once again for taking time out of your day to sit and speak with us.
Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. And like I said, everybody, make sure you check out his website so you can see, whatever announcements he puts for upcoming cons and upcoming work that he's got coming out.
Yep. And have me back sometime.
Oh, we will. Don't worry about that.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for everyone for joining us. And until next time, I will catch you by the spinner rack.